All right, so I'm working on my 68 Mercury Marquee here, one of my favorites. Don't see very many of these too often. We'll do a detailed walk around. Oh, well, the door's locked. I think they made 3,800 of these in 1968, but just a beautiful looking coupe. And I got out from storage, and as you know, these cars tend to sit for some time, and I noticed that when I was stepping on the accelerator, the car would basically just die or even stall out. And that's a very typical problem on any car, but especially on these Autolite 4300 carburetors, like you can see here. So the problem is the accelerator pump. And the accelerator pump, let me take the air cleaner off and I'll tell you a little bit more. Okay, I took the vacuum hose off for the air cleaner and it's out of the way. So this is the stock Motorcraft 4300 carburetor. I think this tag is actually supposed to be on this screw, but in any case, you can say it says C8AF. So that's C is the 60s era, 8, so 1968, A automatic. And this is one of these wonderful Motorcraft 4300 carburetors. Well, here is the accelerator pump right here. As you can see, as I hit the throttle, it'll drop down. And it squirts, it's supposed to squirt a discharge of fuel in there. So, I don't know if you can see it, but let's see. There you go, see the little fuel squirt? So when I picked this up, it wasn't doing that. And what often happens is the underside of these is a little cup that pushes down on this chamber here to squirt gas out of those discharge nozzles. And because of the ethanol fuel and over time, the cups just wear out and they become smaller, so they don't seal well against the wall here, and so you're not getting the pump discharge. So again, that's a very typical symptom. Accelerator pump's going out, you step in the gas and the car just bogs for a second, and then it's fine. Or if you step in the gas relatively slowly, then you don't have a problem. So if you want a little tip in terms of, this is a car that I don't drive very often, and you want to, let's say, not rebuild the carburetor for another year, what you can do is take some WD-40 and squirt it right here on over top of this hole. So WD-40, and then cycle the pump a few times. And often what you're going to get is you're going to get the accelerator pump to come back to life, at least for that year. This is not a long-term fix. Eventually you're going to have to take the carburetor off and put a new accelerator pump on. But I've done this to this car for a couple of years now. I'm just kind of waiting to see how long I can do that for before I really have to rebuild it. And this is the third year. So I'll just squirt it once there and it lasts for the driving season. I'm only putting a couple hundred miles on the car each season, if that. So lasts for the season. The rest of the carburetor works just fine, so I don't have to take it apart. And the other thing you can do is squirt some WD-40 down here into this, where there's a spring that basically opens these secondary venturis. And this one you can see is a little sticky. See how slow it is to rise? Yeah, that needs to be lubricated too. So those are a couple tips and tricks that you can do to these carburetors if you're feeling lazy, you don't want to rebuild them, and they often work. So hopefully that's helpful. And also make sure, I will say, on these Motorcraft 4300s, do not over tighten these nuts. There's 4 of them. What happens is you over tighten them, then you'll bow the base plate and then you'll get vacuum leaks. So I use a little 1/4-inch drive socket. I think those are 7/16 nuts, and I just kind of tighten them relatively gently. Make sure you have good gaskets between the spacer and the carburetor and the spacer and the intake. Make sure you have a gasket that has the PCV elbow underneath it. I've learned that the hard way as well. Some of the gaskets that you get in the kits don't have that, and you're going to get a big air leak, and then your car will not run correctly. So those are a few tips and tricks to keep your, well, 60s, 70s era Ford running well. And we'll just take a look. Here's the inside. of this car. That's my key bag. Got so many keys now. This was the top of the line Mercury for 1968. It was a coupe. Again, it was a Marquee. In 1969, they sunset the Park Lane name, and the Marquee also became a four-door. It became Mercury's range topper. Well, the Marquee Brougham technically did, but the Park Lane was Mercury's top of the line four-door. But the absolute top of the line car was this Marquee. And interestingly, they kind of decontented it a little bit for 68, and power steering was not standard equipment on this car, if you can believe it. Another little tip I'll tell you is make sure you get a new belt for these air conditioning compressors and pulleys. A lot of times what happens is there's an old belt, and for whatever reason, as the belt's aged, then they tend to chatter. Then what happens is somebody snugs them up tighter, and then they burn out this bearing in the idler pulley. And you can see I've replaced this idler pulley. It was getting noisy with a good American-made product. I think it was Alt Tensioner was the name of it, and it's been doing well. But just put a new belt in there and you won't get any chatter. Sometimes you'll see like people will snug it and snug it and snug it, and it'll still chatter, and they burn out this bearing. And that's one other tip. Another thing I will say is on this car, I have to, if I'm running the stock timing, people ask what gas I use. I run premium unleaded. I wish I could get ethanol-free premium unleaded, but I can't near me. So I run premium unleaded, and then I run about 5-6 gallons of racing gas plus lead additive. I found the octane booster doesn't help that much. One of the things that I do, if I can't, there's one station that sells racing gas that isn't that close to me, and I try to drive my cars over that way to get some, is if I don't want the car to spark knock at part throttle, I just unplug the vacuum advance can, and I've got a little cap that I put in there, and the car's a little bit more boggy at that time, but then I have no spark knock at part throttle. If I do full throttle, then yes, I will. But just a little tip, if you want to keep this set to stock advance and you can't always get the right octane, a great way to just lower the ignition timing a little bit so that you don't have it is you just pull the vacuum hose off. And this car's still got plenty of power, even with no vacuum advance, to be honest. It's a little bit more boggy for sure, but not offensively so. And I just drive it around like that until I can get some racing gas. You don't want these motors spark knocking. That's not good for them. So there's a few tips and tricks on this 1968 Mercury Marquee that came from North Carolina originally. We'll take one quick look at the back before we sign off. Beautiful roofline on these. 67 was the first year of this roofline. Ford on the LTD shared it in 1967. Then 68, Ford went to some more upright, funky looking roofline, and Mercury kept the same roofline from 67, which I think is much more graceful. Just a beautiful car. Last year for the vertical taillights for Mercury too. Before in 69 they would go horizontal. In any case, thanks for watching.